Afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening from wherever you are joining us. We have civil servants from all around the world joining us today. A very warm welcome to today's webinar on High Standards, a Common Language for Public Data. My name is Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I will be chairing today's webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house that works on behalf of public servants all around the world. I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner for today, who is Deloitte. Thank you very much for their support and for sharing their expertise with us as well. We have Nadan from Deloitte as a member of our panel today, so thank you very much. So in terms of the topic for today, governments around the world are really looking to seize opportunities which arise from new data technologies. But how well they can do that, the extent to which they can seize those opportunities, depends on a whole host of factors, including better sharing and management of data across government departments and their related organisations. Currently, however, a lot of those systems across and sometimes even within those different organisations aren't necessarily compatible. Data might be stored on different formats or maintained to variable quality standards. And often civil servants don't always understand what is required to really unlock the potential of those huge data assets that they already have or could create in future. And then, of course, there's also the issue of the extent to which the public even trust the public sector to be sharing data that relates to them in this way. So today's webinar, we're going to consider some examples of where progress is already being made, look at some of those issues, some of the challenges, some of the things that are already being done to change governance structures, leadership, the implementation of common standards. And all of this is to help us understand how we can better use data to improve public services and the delivery of public services to citizens. Now, we have a brilliant panel with us today, and in a moment I'm going to introduce each of them. But after our panelists have spoken, there'll also be time for you, the audience, to have some of your questions answered. So using the Q&A function that you should all have on your screens, however you're watching this, please at any point while you are listening to the presentations, feel free to message in your questions, and we will try to take as many of those questions as we can in the discussion after you've heard from our panelists. And now to introduce our wonderful panel. So first of all, we will hear from Sue Bateman. And Sue is Deputy Director of Data and Innovation at the Government Digital Service in the United Kingdom. Sue's work supports public sector organisations to make greater use of emerging technologies to improve public services and policy making. Sue's work includes responsibility for the Data Standards Authority and initiatives to promote ethical use of data, data sharing, open data, and data capability. After Sue, we'll hear from Tom Dufour. Tom is Director General of the Strategic Data Management Branch at Statistics Canada. Tom's areas include the Office of Privacy Management and Information Coordination, the Statistical Geomatics Centre, Data Stewardship Division, and Data Integration Infrastructure Division. He has worked in a number of areas in Statistics Canada for over 29 years, so really has a wealth of experience in these issues. Then we turn to our knowledge partner, who's represented by Nadan Muthukumarana. And Nadan is the data analytics partner at Deloitte. He's the lead partner for data analytics and artificial intelligence in public and transportation sectors, and has over 20 years experience working with public sector organizations all around the world. He also runs the Deloitte Analytics Labs, which is an innovation incubator that specializes in the development of products and services which combine AI with simulation technologies. And if that's not enough, he leads initiatives to improve inclusivity in the workplace as well. Then we will hear from Justin Marsico, who is the Chief Data Officer at the Bureau of Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department in America. Justin's work focuses on the modernization of the Bureau's management of data, including data governance and analytics. He also oversees the Fiscal Service's provision of data to the public, in particular on how public resources are spent, including on USA's spending.gov. In a previous role Justin created the federal spending website called the Data Lab. So really interested in how you can use data to get more transparency to the citizen. And then last but not least, we will hear from Sigrid Sicht, who is Director of Data Policy in the Department of State Information Systems at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications in Estonia. And it's always really good to welcome a panel member from Estonia when we're talking about data or digitalization or new technologies, because although they're a small, relatively small and new democracy, they're such a world leader in these issues. And Sigrid's main focus is on open data and everything involved with open data. And she's got a European background in smart city solutions and data management. So I'm sure you'll agree we have a really stellar panel here today. Without further ado, because I know time will be tight to hear from each of our panelists, I'm going to invite Sue to give us her opening presentation. Over to you, Sue.
Brilliant. Thank you, Siobhan, for that lovely introduction of all of us. And I have to say, I'm delighted. I'm really excited to be on this panel this afternoon, because it's always really great to hear what other organisations and other countries are doing. And I have to say that the title of this particular event today really intrigued me. And I thought, I wonder if actually we're going to end up approaching this in a slightly different way from each other and focus on different themes. And I think for me, that's part of the heart of the issue that we're dealing with here, that when we talk about data, particularly in the well, not only in the public sector context, but the public sector context that I'm working in, it is a complex environment. There isn't a magic wand here, and so it is an area that is absolutely fascinating, and one with, I think, some challenges for us around the degree to which I and my team sitting in the centre of government in the UK sets the standards and controls that we expect other organisations to adopt, versus the degree of flexibility that we give organisations, given that we see this very much as an enabler to delivering those better joined up public services, better policies, better and more timely statistics and research. So some of the themes that I'll cover off today are really trying to get at how do we balance that challenge, how do we balance those tensions, and also I think seize on a moment really where in the UK, and I can see this globally actually, ministers, senior leaders across central, local government and the wider public sector are all seeing really the need to invest in data, and perhaps seeing for the first time not just the need to invest in the slightly shinier ends of the outputs of data like AI and data science, but recognising through the response to the recent pandemic that actually that investment in some of the core foundational stuff is really important as well. And I guess that's where I'll start in terms of what are we trying to do to tackle this massive opportunity, but also some of these tricky challenges. And recently, under the stewardship of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in the UK, we've helped to produce the National Data Strategy. And we're leading on the third mission of that, which is about how do we set a framework, how do we set a strategic direction for the UK government around improving the way that we can use and reuse data. And we've come up with what we hope are 5 fairly simple areas of reform that we think are absolutely key to getting it right. And this has been around for a long time. I myself have been in and around the data space for probably 8 or 9 years now in different kind of roles. And so some of the concepts that we're talking about in the National Data Strategy, they're not new. They predate me even by a long time, but we're trying to get at that. If we are serious about this, there are some foundational things that we need to fix. So the first area is kind of focusing around the quality, accessibility and availability of data. So getting at the heart of improving the quality of the data, improving the flow of that data where it's absolutely appropriate and legal to do so. The second area is around standards and enforcement, and this is where the Data Standards Authority comes in, and I'll talk about that a bit more. But setting those standards, and as well as allowing that kind of flexibility and kind of generation through the government and wider than that ecosystem, also how we're going to enforce and ensure adoption. Another area that we focus on is around productivity and accountability. So particularly thinking about the leadership, and we've had some new senior appointments into the government digital service recently that we're delighted about, and an increased focus from ministers and across departments on data and the data agenda in government. So that's part of that story. The next area to focus on then is around capability, culture, and leadership. So leadership in this sense goes beyond kind of the key people sitting in the centre, and that sense of leadership, not just amongst people that we would probably class as data experts in kind of data specialist roles, but the decision makers in organisations who need to be more informed around data. Creating a culture where pro data use and reuse is more of the norm, rather than kind of a slight nervousness, particularly with the data protection regime. Obviously doing it absolutely properly, but just understanding more around the benefits of using and linking data. And then finally, which I always think is probably a wrapper to all of that is absolutely crucial for us in public sector organisations, is the public trust and ethical dimension. So thinking really about, we have a data ethics framework that is fairly simple in its concept of around use of data in projects. We're starting to think now, along with many other countries, I think, about, as we get more and more sophisticated in our use of data and in the use of algorithms, how are we going to be demonstrating transparency and being ethical in those areas as well. So those are quite key for me. So that's kind of the overarching framing. I think in the couple of minutes that I have remaining, I'll give you a little bit, 1 minute, okay, fine, a little bit around the Data Standards Authority, which was established last year. And it's been created as a means of driving through those common standards and standardization of practices. It's useful, I think, for this session, because it is kind of all of those things together. We're creating the governance, we're creating communities around the Data Standards Authority, we're setting direction, we're identifying priority areas through user needs across government, and we're developing and setting those standards in partnership, not just with the public sector, but beyond that too. And I think, we're 1 year into the Data Standards Authority of an initial 3-year programme. We're on that journey, and we're on that journey with the National Data Strategy as well. And I'll finish there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sue. Such a great way to start, I think, all of these conversations, because you touched on so many issues which I think will come out from other panel members and throughout the discussion. So the need to set standards that equally be flexible so that you can get buy-in from different government departments and agencies, but also everything you said about the importance of leadership, not just from people right at the top in those kind of key positions, but also just civil servants throughout the organisation, understanding what's required and showing the right leadership in terms of making sure that the people they work with understand this as well. Governance, I think, going to be important. And I know it's really good that you can tell us a little bit about the Data Standards Authority, because that was set up during the pandemic, so it's still really new and has had very interesting first year. So thank you so much. Great way to kick off. Tom, I'm going to come over to you now for your presentation. Thanks so much. I think we have to get you off mute, Tom.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
There we go. Thank you. My name is Tom Dufour. I'm the Director General of the Strategic Data Management Branch at Statistics Canada, CWE. I'm honored to be gathered here with you in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and to show respect to all the Indigenous people who have walked these lands. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I'm also very honored to be on this panel with such distinguished experts in the data and standards field. So this time last year, the world was starting to reckon with the pandemic and the level of suffering associated with COVID-19, the infections, the deaths, the job loss, economic upheaval. It's truly been heart-wrenching. And the pandemic has also really accelerated fundamental shifts in our societies and our economies. Now, we live in a world where data comes to us from more sources than ever and more continuously and in all directions now. Now, we also live in a time when disaggregating data is more and more important than ever. The pandemic has not impacted all people equally, as we know. We need to see what's happening in different populations in different regions so we can help leaders in government tailor their responses. And that's why data sharing is a critical task. Standards are essential for collaboration. They're the bridges we need to communicate ideas between individuals, across sectors and nations, even across time. Which brings me to the important work Canada has been doing to boost the adoption of common data standards, both within government and across sectors. Now, a few years ago, in response to the exponential increase in the amount of data collected and shared, the Government of Canada recognized the need to develop a whole of government data strategy. And as every federal department develops policies, administers programs, it generates a vast amount of data. Because their primary purpose is administrative in nature, these data are often collected in ways that make them difficult to share. So they are also underutilized. We know that in day-to-day operations, in long-term planning, decision-making, both within the government and across, both within government, but also across departments within organizations. So together, Statistics Canada, the Privy Council Office, and the Treasury Board Secretariat developed a data strategy roadmap for the Federal Public Service in 2018. Now, the recommendations in this roadmap are structured around 4 themes: stronger governance, improved data literacy and skills, enabling infrastructure and legislation, and more focused treatment of data as a valuable and strategic asset. The roadmap has several interrelated goals. It aims to use data more strategically, support the transition to a digital government, and ensure that the public service can harness the power of data to make evidence-based decisions so that we can serve Canadians better. The next and more challenging step is to begin developing standards for interoperability, integration, and rapid response. Data need to be interoperable in order to be reusable. The more data are used, the more value they create. Statistics Canada has the experience and networks, both nationally and internationally, to put standards in action. Here are just some examples and some initiatives that we've been involved with. Maria, if you can go to slide 3, please. Sorry, I haven't really been following. Statistics Canada is a member of the high-level group for the modernization of official statistics. The chief statisticians working together to identify trends, threats, and opportunities to modernizing statistical organizations. We're leading efforts to create common statistical data architecture, supporting statistical organizations in the design, integration, production, and dissemination of official statistics based on both traditional and new types of data sources. We've addressed data gaps in standards through the development of the new Canadian Research and Development Classification System. We've established energy standards to support the new Canadian Centre for Energy Information Portal. We're also creating collaborative virtual data centers to support researchers and making reference data more openly available and interoperable for the Government of Canada. And we're also implementing the initial stages of a whole of government approach to reference data management. Beyond that, and Maria, if you can go to slide 2, please. In 2019, the Canadian Data Governance Standardization Collaborative was established. Our chief statistician, Anil Arora, is co-chair. This group spent all of 2020 working on their own roadmap, scoping out priority areas for data governance that might benefit from standardization. This roadmap includes recommendations to address gaps as well as new areas where standards and conformity assessment are needed. It also puts forward proposals for national and international standardization initiatives, timelines, and organizations that can perform the work. The Collaborative's working group met virtually last year to discuss case studies that serve as pragmatic examples of the key issues facing data governance today, especially in the pandemic. The next step Canada takes is perhaps even more important. We need to ensure the bridges we're building are on solid foundations. There must be trust amongst governments, industry, and civil society groups as information moves continuously and in all directions. Now, as a confederation based on decentralized powers to provinces and territories, Canada operates within a patchwork of legislation. It's important to engage with policymakers on ways to promote public trust and safeguard the privacy of Canadians as we work on data governance issues. Citizens must be able to trust that the privacy is protected, that their data will not be misused, and that both the private and public sectors communicate in simple, straightforward manner with them. The trust is the foundation on which our digital and data-driven economy and society will be built. We must develop not only new standards, but also the public policies and framework, legislation to support progress on these goals. Statistics Canada is taking a leadership role at that task. With our expertise in rigorous methods and data strategies, we're working collaboratively to develop standards that people can trust. We're also working together with policymakers to modernize the framework of the protection of personal information so that Canadian innovators benefit from clear rules, even as technologies continue to evolve. So thank you for the important work that all of you are doing in your own countries and to build bridges to us and to each other all over the world. Thank you, Siobhan.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tom. What I love about these webinars is the fact that we get that really global opportunity to compare what's going on. And already there, even in just those first two presentations, we've seen some similarities emerge. So in terms of the national strategies that are being developed and then moving on to the kind of data standards aspects within that, but also just slightly different approaches to it, which is really interesting to compare and contrast. But I like what you said right at the beginning, Tom, about just remembering we're doing all of this so that we can use data to improve the lives of citizens, to improve public service delivery to citizens, and the fact that both you and Sue both ended with a real note about trust and being able to get the foundations right. We have to get that trust between central government and citizens. So it's not just about the technical aspects, there's also those really human and more cultural aspects as well. And I'm sure as we move over to Naden, we will hear a bit more about some of those. Over to you, Naden.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, and hi, everyone. I'm going to take the segue from Tom around the citizens and why are we really talking about data sharing here now? It's all about, in the public sector, delivering public services, right? And all of these public services get delivered and received by us, the citizens of a nation. And in that sort of perspective, there's a way of looking at data sharing from a citizen's point of view, and we sometimes call it the citizen's journeys. So a good example would be an individual citizen might receive a lot of services from various different public sector organizations, but that is all part of one individual's journey in life. So, for example, we as citizens receive, especially in the current circumstances, health is a major area of services that we receive, but we are very, very tightly linked to all of the health services that we receive with potentially the welfare services we also receive from government, in certain cases police and justice type of services, and something that none of us can ever avoid is revenue and tax type of services as well, right? So a good way for us to really emphasize the importance of public data sharing in public sector is to say it's all about improving the way we deliver services to citizens and to be able to integrate those services in a much more meaningful fashion. And that's been the sort of vision and the aspiration of public sector across all countries and all governments for a long time, and it's a continuous journey that we are on. So to integrate and to better personalize and tailor the services that we deliver. So that's why data sharing, in my mind, is so important. But when we are trying to do data sharing, I think it's important to look at it from a citizen journeys point of view. It is also therefore linked to the point that some of my colleagues have already made, and a common theme across this discussion is around in order for public sector organizations to share citizen data, especially citizen data, you need to have the trust and the consent of the individual. So again, we I think across the world we put the trust topic to the test when various nations were developing the COVID-19 test and trace type of apps. There's been varied type of responses, and that was a good reflection of the level of trust that the citizens have in terms of the government, and especially in sharing citizen data. So, and there are lots of other related sort of aspects to trust and consent, which is the legal aspect as well. But I'm not going to go into the detail. But beyond the actual act of sharing, these are some of the other issues that we need to grapple with. I'm going to come on to in a minute to talk about some practical things we need to do to improve the sharing of data across public sector. But I don't think we can get onto it without acknowledging what the pandemic has done in way of forcing us to do more and more data sharing, or even put data sharing on steroids, as I call it. Data sharing in public sector and across the industries were important before. So this work, as you heard from some of my other colleagues, have started a long time ago, but the pandemic has kind of given us no choice and really forced various different organizations, both across public sector, but public sector with private sector as well, in terms of securing essential supply chains for medicine, food, and other things during the pandemic. So it's kind of given us no choice, and as a result, there's been lots and lots of cross-organizational data sharing that's taken place in a real sort of a accelerated way. So there are many things which are really bad about the pandemic, but the one good thing in terms of data sharing, I would say, is it's absolutely accelerated the need, but also the act of sharing data. So if data sharing was important before, now I would say for most organizations, not only public sector, but private sector, I would say has become mission critical. And without it, a lot of people will struggle to deliver the services that the organization has to deliver. One other slight twist to the data sharing that we should observe as a result of the pandemic has created business patterns which are completely unprecedented. And as a result, the type of data that we need to share and across your value chains and what we call ecosystems. So it could be the people that you deal with, but also adjacent industries and sectors that you need to share data with, has to be, sort of up to date, almost sort of short-term data, what I call effervescent data. So, the data that gives you a good view of your value chain and what's happening around you as an organization within the last 2 to 3 months, because anything beyond that is not reflective of the highly dynamic sort of nature of things that change around you. So, post-COVID, we are using effervescent data, and the way we use data to do the predictions are pretty short-term as well, because long-term forecasts are not that accurate. So this is forcing a lot of organizations to do the data sharing, and this emergence of the value chain and ecosystem data sharing, which is of note. And we need to ensure as public sector that we continue to do this going forward and enable organizations to do this more and more. So just very quickly, what are the practical areas to improve data sharing across public sector? A lot of people will go into a lot of detail about the technicalities of standards and all of that. There are, you need to have standards and a common language, but a lot of these things can be overcome using the latest and greatest technologies, natural language processing, AI, and all of those tools. But I facilitate a forum called Data Leaders Forum in the UK, where a lot of public sector CDOs and data leaders come together to talk about to improve data sharing across public sector. They say three things in terms of what they want to achieve in the context of data sharing. They say the need to establish what they call a canonical data model. So it's not going down to the really prescribed sort of detail, but each organization being able to define what type of data they hold. Is it about people? Is it about locations, places, or is it about business services? So having that registry of information at entity level will be a very good start, is what a lot of the data leaders say. Then they talk about the datanomics or the economics of data sharing. So again, we almost take it for granted that people will share data, but the economics, the cost of curation, the cost of sharing, and what is the benefit of sharing and all of that is still not 100% sorted out. So again, with the National Data Strategy and working with the Cabinet Office in the UK, the likes of the Treasury, I think there are foundational stuff we can do more to enable organizations to share data more and more. So, and the third one I mentioned already is about winning the public trust. No one can do any of this stuff if the consent and the trust isn't there. So, you know, we mentioned the need to do a lot more in engaging with the public to increase their trust. But I think I will wrap up by saying, you know, public sector, you know, at the best of times will, or when it's most needed, will step in like they're doing in with the pandemic. I think there is a huge opportunity for public sector to take the lead in making and driving the data sharing initiative forward and set a good high quality standards to other sectors, private and financial services as well. So with that, I'm going to finish my
Thanks, Nadan.
presentation.
Thanks so much. So again, some of those issues that other people have said are really important, like the trust that you ended on there, but and also that reminder that it's about the citizen first approach, that actually if you get this right, you can really place the citizen at the heart of how you deliver your policies. And I think the COVID issue that you raised, we'll probably come back to that in the discussion as well, in that it's forced people to share data in a way that we've never seen before. I think the public have seen the benefits of that as well. That could have a positive legacy, hopefully, coming out of the pandemic. But equally, some issues around trust, and I know Sigrid might touch on this in terms of, were people ready to share their data on things like the COVID apps that different countries rolled out? And then finally, one thing you raised that I don't think anyone else has touched on yet, which is really important for government departments and maybe civil servants that are watching this, is the economics of data sharing. Who pays for this and who gets the benefit from it? I think that's really important to tease that out if we want this to be adopted across government departments. Thank you so much. Justin, we're going to come over to you in America.
Okay, thank you so much for having me as a part of this panel. It's an honor to be with you guys here today. So I'm Justin. I'm the Chief Data Officer with the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, which is part of the US Department of the Treasury. And as you can imagine, while my focus is on data, it's on a particular type of data, which is financial data. And I want to give you a quick view of some of the products that we're working on and the ways that we've tried to address some of the challenges that the other panelists have brought up so far. But before I go there, I just want to start with our fiscal data vision, which is on the next slide. And the concept here is that we want to create a public that is engaged and informed about public sector finance and has trust in government. So obviously the trust in government theme is resonating across many different areas in the data world. But within the financial data space in the US, we're really focused on providing data to the public and making sure we're doing it the right way. And basically the reason for that is that we see one of the the kind of most basic tenets of democratic society being this agreement between the government and the governed, where we take resources away and we put them to use for another purpose, for the public good. But then it's incumbent on us to provide the public with clear, understandable information about what happened to those resources. So we feel like that's really important. And I just want to point out one more thing in here, which is that it's not enough for us to just produce reliable, high quality, accurate data and then kind of kick it over the transom and say, okay, public, have at it. We consider that not doing our jobs. We need to go a step further and make sure that our data is in the format that can actually answer questions that members of the public have. So we're taking it a step further and saying, we're judging ourselves by whether people are consuming this information and understanding it and leading to insights, not just putting it out there. So I want to give you a couple examples of some products that we have right now where we're trying to do this on the next slide. In the intro, Siobhan mentioned that we have a website called usaspending.gov. And basically what this site is a public repository of all of the contracts and grants that our federal government has issued. And so one of the challenges that we have is we have to collect data from over 100 agencies that are a part of our federal system on all of their spending activities. And there are many challenges with that related to the variance in data, data integrity, data quality, but most notably standardization. And the way that we have approached standardization is by basically having a permanent working group that consists of the different agencies who send data to us and the Treasury, my team, and White House leadership, where we are always looking at our data, trying to understand where our standards are falling down and can be improved, where there are data quality issues in our data and how we can address those by tightening up data definitions or implementing rules in the system that accepts data to flag problematic transactions or data for the agencies who are sending information to us. One of the other strategies that we've employed that has helped a lot with data standardization came directly from one of the laws that established USA spending. And this is not a favorite feature for the agencies who send us data, but it has been really helpful. And that is a legal requirement for those data that agencies send to us to be audited, and those audits become public. So there is some public pressure on the agencies who send us data to get it right, lest they have those audits reflect poorly on their work. Okay, I want to give you one more example of a product that we maintain, which you can see on the next slide here. Called Your Guide to America's Finances. And this is really trying to get at that concept that I was talking about in the opening, where we want to go a step further from just providing the data to making sure that we are translating it into a form that our citizenry can actually consume and understand and be engaged with. And so what this product is called, it's called Your Guide to America's Finances. And basically it's a year in review for the federal government's financial picture and outlook. And this is data that has existed in the public sphere for a long time. But what we found was that people weren't coming to Treasury. They weren't coming to us to get the answers to the questions that they had about federal finance. So what we're trying to do is create a product where we're actually meeting people where they were. And the approach that we took to developing this product is something called human-centered design. And basically what that means is that we were going out and talking with members of the public. The way that we did this pre-pandemic was just walking around the National Mall in Washington, D.C. with our Treasury badges and just intercepting tourists who were coming there to visit and saying, hi, can you talk to me about public sector finance? Like, is this a topic that's important to you? What do you know about it? Where do you get your information today? What are you curious about? What are you passionate about? And we did over 100 of those types of interviews. And from all that feedback, we put together this product, which provides information about what happened in the last year, but also teaches people what the concepts are at the same time. So we're not just translating it, we're also explaining what the deficit is, what the debt is, how those two concepts are different from each other. And so you can see some examples here of visualizations where we really try to make sure that people are understanding. Just real quickly, one of the concepts we heard from people was that $1 trillion is something that is too big to comprehend. So we built visualizations across the site that are collections of a concept that they could understand, which is $1 billion. So you can see on the right here, the purpose of this visualization is it starts with the idea that a dot is $1 billion, and then explains what $27 trillion look like when it's comprised of that many dots. When you see it on the screen, it's a little bit larger and makes more sense. But anyway, so that's that product. We've got a lot of good feedback from the public from that. And the last thing I wanted to mention on the last slide is that we've had a lot of progress in the U.S. Federal government because of a law that was passed in 2019. It was called the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. And one of the things that it did is it required the major federal agencies to appoint chief data officers and then to start doing data governance work. So that law and the implementation has really been a sea change in terms of the way that our government has treated data in the major agencies. And then within my own agency at the Fiscal Service, we have our own data strategy and approach, and you can see some of the goals that we have there, which I think resonate with what everybody else has been talking about: improving our governance, number one, doing analytics to make ourselves better and more effective, and then, like the products that I showed you on the first couple of slides, improving the way that we deliver data, not just throwing data out there and hoping for the best, but really translating it to meet the needs of people. So anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Justin. Really interesting to hear a slightly different perspective in that you're kind of using data itself to inform and educate the public in the most accessible way possible, which in turn can help drive up trust in the use of data because they can see the benefits of that to them, which is really good. But also an issue you touched on, I think, which builds on what other people have said about, you said the importance of having those CDOs, those kind of leadership roles, but the legislation required to put in place those kind of things, and also the regulation around kind of standards of and quality of the data. So the importance of getting the regulatory framework right is really important. Sigrid, last but not least, we're going to come to you. I think you might be having a few connection problems. Don't worry, if that's the case, I will let you know if we can't hear you properly, and maybe we can do it without the video or something. But for now, over to you.
Yes, thank you. And hello from Tallinn. And thanks so much for including me in this panel. I thought about speaking about my experiences today. So I just declared my taxes completely online in under 10 minutes. And 10 minutes is a long time by Estonian standards, but I had to give the state access to my mortgage info from my bank. So why it took me only a few minutes is that the income tax return is pre-filled. It means that information on me as a taxpayer and my income and expenses that is available in the Estonian Tax and Customs Board's databases has been entered into the income tax return. And pre-filled income tax returns can be checked, changed, and submitted all online. So data entered into a pre-filled income tax return include information like my bank account number and my, as the bank account owner's name, because the state already knows my bank account number, because this is where Ministry of Finance deposits my income every month. And employer's information relevant to calculation of income tax, payments subject to income tax and income tax withheld, unemployment insurance premiums and contributions to a funded pension, and so on, things I do not want to do myself. Sickness pay, a very relevant during COVID-19, training expenses paid, gifts and donations, and many, many more things. And the same way, I also moved into my new home, hence the mortgage, and I only had to change the data in the online population registry for the state to know once and for all that I live in this new apartment in Tallinn. And for example, because I live in Tallinn, where for all the city's inhabitants, the public transportation is free, I am granted free rides immediately when I use my bus card. And this is all possible thanks to the X-Road, which is the data exchange layer for information systems like databases. X-Road enables a secure internet-based data exchange between information systems and is very common in the public sector for cross-agencies data sharing. Plus, trust is a big thing today. To increase trust, when attached to X-Road, data tracker can be implemented by agencies. And in doing so, offer the citizens, like myself, a comprehensive view of how their personal data has been used by the agencies. So every citizen can go to our state portal, sd.ee, and look up all the queries made about them by agencies. And to exchange data, a member of the X-Road describes the shared data, and other members can use that data when they have a contract between them. So by now, X-Road is international, and thanks to it, people can, for example, buy prescription drugs in Estonia that were prescribed to them in Finland or Croatia. And all of it thanks to XD, as it was called back in 2001 when it was created, when I, for example, was 5 years old. So meaning by now, we in Estonia have a whole generation raised with digital public services, which were created safely and are trustworthy, and created before people spreading mis and disinformation about security of, let's say, e-voting surfaced in such high numbers as there are now. And that's not to say that people shouldn't ask questions, but those asking relevant questions are easily misled, at least I feel, by the level of mis and disinformation out there, whereas objective information is not too easily found, and definitely not found in such volumes as subjective information is. And with e-voting or declaring taxes, our citizen could see the benefits before. So now these people have a very big platform, these people being the ones giving out mis and disinformation, because nothing really bad has happened, thank God, with these digital services, and people have felt and seen the benefits, such as the time saved thanks to these services being digital. But this is no longer so for a new service that is coming up in Estonia. And why I think sharing objective and truthful information with your customer on a regular basis, for example, government with its citizens, is so important, is that Estonia is one of the many countries where we have our COVID-19 app called Hoia. And even though we have rather e-friendly citizens, Hoia app has not been downloaded too many times. I checked today and it's about 20% of our whole population. And since it was released back in August, not a lot of information has been shared via all relevant channels of communications, whereas there have been many Facebook and blog posts circulating in Estonia on how the state is controlling your every move with the app, and that one should never download such horrendous app that saves all this data about you and then definitely shares it with the government, which are all obviously lies. But in my opinion, we haven't done enough to to educate the people. So we had the trust, and now I think we are lacking the motivation to really educate them, because it needs to be on a regular basis.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sigrid. And we could hear all of that, so that was absolutely fine. I mean, interesting what you say. They're really good examples of where, because Estonia has been doing this, as you say, for a generation of people now, and you've made me certainly feel very old on this panel, by the way, Sue, but you know, you've got a generation now of people, high levels of trust, because they've seen the benefits of this, whether it's tax returns, change of address, or e-voting. But at the same time, interesting what you said, you just can't get complacent, because there's so much disinformation, so many conspiracy theories, that actually that need for the governments to be communicating constantly, to be reviewing what they're doing constantly, and as Justin was doing as well, to be sharing information in a way that the public can see how useful it is. All of that needs to be constantly undertaken and looked at, otherwise that trust can very quickly be lost. So thank you everybody for your opening presentations. We have already had quite a few questions in, so I'm actually going to kick off with some questions from the audience, and I think there are a couple here which seem to relate to a kind of tension between how do you balance the kind of desire for standards for open data, so to share the data as much as possible amongst government departments, but also with the public, for the public to use it, with the need to have all of those kind of concerns about privacy and the ethics of data and kind of legislation propriety of data standards. How do you kind of balance those tensions? What are the tensions, and how are people dealing with those? I'm going to shake up the order a little bit. Nadan, you've worked with quite a few governments around the world. Is this a tension that you come across quite often?
Yes, I wouldn't necessarily say a tension, but these two aspects of data sharing has been in discussion for a long time. I think, you know, if I take the first aspect of open data, and a lot of us are real supporters of, you know, open data. When you say open data, things that anyone can access as well. But I'll talk about the other aspect in a minute. You know, the purpose and the outcomes that you want to achieve out of having open data is to generate innovation, new new services, to be, you know, you want to stimulate the markets and industries to use this available new data and being able to create new layers of services for people or citizens or businesses. So that's the kind of aspect that most people have been talking about when you say open data that everyone can access. However, I think, you know, if you talk about public sector and improve the need to share data to improve citizen services on an immediate basis, you know, you don't have to make it available. It would still be quite secure and between trusted government organization or public sector organizations, and I think the debate has been more around legality. You know, are you allowed to share this stuff, and have you got the consent from the citizens? So and in certain cases, the ability to do it when it comes to funding and all of that. And I think someone has said, why do you need funding? You know, public sector is run by, you know, public money, but each department, in order to share a piece of data, would still need a you know, set of resources to do it. So coming back to the question, it's not so much of a tension in the sense that I don't think everyone's trying to share data in an open fashion. It's for, you know, it's horses for courses, but both, you know, both sides will have a benefit ultimately for the citizens, but in different ways.
Thanks. Sue, I'm going to come to you for your thoughts on this, the kind of balance between as much open data as possible, but also those privacy concerns and requirements?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'm kind of, what's coming to my mind is I think the Open Data Institute in the UK and lots of other organisations, probably going back a few years, have created a diagram that kind of shows the sliding scale really of data that can and probably should be made openly available, and you know, like Canada, the US, Estonia colleagues have talked about some of this. I think we're all on that kind of the same vision about making data openly available under an open government license where it's appropriate to do so. And then there are probably some aspects of data that the public sector hold, and you know, it will be the same across other sectors and industries as well, that we will not want to release, and some of that may come down to when you start to make comparisons internationally, will come down to cultural differences. So in the UK, generally health data, tax data, interestingly, compared to Estonia, is also in that bracket of being seen as quite sensitive personal information. And so there will always be, I think, special handling considerations around that. But I think the interesting thing for me is also kind of taking a step back, and in some of the other presentations, there's been reference to the kind of different techniques and different technologies. And I think getting away from just a simple concept of we're sharing, which can quite often bring to mind, it's like a hard disk drive or a CD that's accidentally dropped in a car park, shall we say. And actually we're hopefully moving far away from that kind of environment where we're talking about, in some cases, the personal data not needing to move. It's a simple flag to validate somebody's eligibility for a particular service or say who they are. So I think that's really, for me, the next phase of kind of development, because the more that we can use the technology around the helping organisations to set those safeguards and those parameters, I think the more confident, hopefully, that organisations and decision makers will be about actually, should we be sharing that? And then the final thing, of course, is just because we can legally share data doesn't always mean that we should, and that's where the data ethics aspect comes into this. And I suspect that's probably what's driving this question as well. And I would say, very simply, you know, what is the purpose for sharing and bringing together the data? Have you got a clear articulation? Is it going to be intrusive in any way? And if it is, does that intrusion outweigh the benefits, or do the benefits outweigh? And that's kind of the starting point in at that debate, but I'll let others come in with thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. I'm going to come to Justin, Sigrid and Tom on the same sort of question, but I want to add in some of the other people are building on this question now. I think people are saying in particular, you know, lots of talk about things like artificial intelligence maybe worry people, concern people when it comes to trusting public sector with their data. So is that something that you have heard and you're aware of? And also, just somebody has said, maybe could you explain a bit why people are worried about their data being shared? What are the concerns that you hear about, and do you have sympathy with them? Tom, I'm going to come to you for your thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you. These are all really excellent questions and excellent points. So at Statistics Canada, we're a national statistical organization. And, you know, our role is to not only provide information to Canadians and Canadian organizations and to others, but it's also, our role is sort of transitioning quite a bit towards being more of a data steward. And this is something that has sort of evolved, I think, for a lot of NSOs. And for us, trust is that basic element. And when I think about trust, I think about it often in two ways. That people trust us, that organizations and individuals trust us, that we will protect the information that they give us. There's also the trust that the data that they'll be receiving meets a certain quality, meets a certain level to be able to be used in those decisions. So again, a very important thing. So we trade in trust, and Statistics Canada has over 100 years of being a trusted data steward in Canada. And again, as we continue, we need to continue to build on that. And more importantly, I think that what happens is you have to make sure when we talk about the open data, I think that you can do both. You need to ensure that you continue to protect the privacy, that's at the forefront of everything that you do, while still meeting, as we know, and especially as we've seen through the pandemic, there's a real, the best insights that you can get at often come from integrating data, integrating social, economic, environmental statistics to be able to drive those deep insights. And again, for us, it's important at the very most that we continue to make sure that we're the trusted organization. Sue talked a little bit about data ethics and governance in there. Something that we take incredibly seriously when we bring in pieces of data. We work with the necessity and proportionality framework to be able to justify the work that's being done. That any sort of privacy is factored in a reflection before even beginning to acquire a data source or to begin work. These are all incredibly important steps for us, and that transparency is what helps us with Canadians to maintain that trust.
Great, thanks, Tom. Sigrid, I'm going to come to you because I came to you last time, so I'm not going to come to you last this time. So Sigrid.
Yes. So firstly, coming from the tension between open data and privacy requirements, just to give it maybe a different point of view, where I see the tension lies is more from the public sector official side, because in Estonia they definitely want to open up a lot of data, but no one, and I definitely understand, no one wants this. If you don't know if you can open it up, then you would rather open less than open more. So we, from the minister's side, are definitely working towards creating these guidelines as to what is open data, because especially as in Estonia, if you open up data about, let's say, a fire in someone's building, and in that village maybe only 5 people live, and it's not named whose house it was, you can still make the owner, and that's not really open data. So we have our work cut out for us there. And if I see the artificial intelligence question, definitely the black box thing, where we have already started, is that we also have, I don't know the exact number, but definitely 50 plus AI solutions in the public sector already. And we have these monthly meetings, webinars, where different public sector officials promote these cases and speak on them. And the invites are sent to public sector officials, but we are recording them and they are publicly available in YouTube. Obviously they're in Estonian, but they are very popular. And just to, we can't always say how the result comes from the AI black box anyway, but we can at least try to educate people on artificial intelligence altogether. So we are definitely trying to do that.
Thanks, Sigrid. I need some education, because when people start talking about AI and black boxes, then that's where I start to get a bit lost. So definitely need some education. Justin, I'm going to come to you on this issue of open data and privacy.
Yeah, I think it's actually a very good question to ask, because maybe this is a kind of easy way of addressing the question, but some of what I've found is that we often kind of impute an answer onto a question about data sharing because we think we know what the public wants, and really what we're doing is we're expressing our culture, so we often have a culture of no, and we use the excuse of privacy or the public to justify that. And so one thing that I think is helpful to kind of push back against that a little bit is just to say, like, the people who run the systems that capture data in them don't own the data. The data is owned by the enterprise, and the data is an asset of the enterprise. So first of all, I think it helps to just push decision making up to the executive level, so that you're not dealing with those kinds of cultural issues. The other thing I think about here is, like, it's really helpful to have a legal framework. You know, we have in the US, we have a strong legal framework to protect privacy. We have a law called the Privacy Act, which restricts what we're able to do with data about persons. But then we also have, I mentioned before, something called the Evidence Act. And what the Evidence Act does is it says, federal government, you are now required to make data open by default. So that by default language basically tells us everything that is not prevented from disclosure under the Privacy Act or other statutes, other laws or restrictions should be made open. So your approach should be not like, oh, what should we be eking out, but like start with the idea that data should be open, and then see what you can actually release.
Great, I like that. So kind of flip the default on that completely. Just very quickly before we go on to another couple of questions, just to everybody who's in the audience, you will find you've been emailed a feedback survey from Global Government Forum. Please do take a few minutes to look at that and fill that in afterwards, just so that we can always make sure we're giving you exactly what you want out of these events. That would be wonderful. Thank you. We've got so many questions coming in, and I'm really conscious that time is tight. So I'm going to take a couple together, and I'm going to come to the panel members, and you can choose whether you answer one or both of those as quickly as possible. So one is about the fact that it's the private sector that are generally leading the way on kind of these issues and developing new technologies. So how do we make sure that the public sector and the private sector work efficiently together? What more can we be doing there? And then the question that kind of complements that, I think, is that within the public sector, so within government departments and agencies, quite often data issues are seen as a technical issue, and they're kind of siloed within an organization, whereas everybody, as we've discussed, really needs to understand at least some of the basics around these things. So how do we ensure, when it comes more maybe on the workforce side of things, the skills side of things, that we are factoring that into kind of our HR practices, for example, going forward? So either answer kind of about the connection between public and private sector, or about skills and understanding within civil services. I'm going to come to you, Tom, first to answer these.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to be quick with regards to skill sets. A lot of the data strategies, not only the federal data strategy, but also data strategies that have been written by departments within the federal family in Canada, have a sort of built-in pillar to discuss about digital skills. Statistics Canada has been developing a lot of literacy training. Literacy assessment is another thing. We've asked individual departments in their roadmaps to be able to identify where they are. And again, not even necessarily at the whole with regards to the organization, but also even from functional. Everyone's got a role to do and know something about data. Not everyone needs to be a data wrangler. Not everyone needs to be able to sort of spin databases on their fingers, but people need to be able to know some basics. So we've invested quite a bit in trying to bring forward a data literacy and skill set. We've also, there's been this call for more CDOs and making sure that there's the business side of data is really sort of considered more than just the IT side. We now have digital officers too. Digital is not the same as data, it needs data, but it's not. So these are sort of organizational pieces. At Statistics Canada, we now have an office of the CDO to be that voice. Really, really quickly, with regards to the private sector, we've seen examples. Everything to me that we've seen lately speaks to great partnerships. And we've seen examples of partnerships with regards to public-private other non-governmental organizations. This to me is the key. We've had a lot of success on the geospatial side by bringing in public sector and private sector. So I think that's the key, is we just need to make sure that we work together for the greater good of our countries and our citizens.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Justin, going to come back to you. Go from Canada straight over to America.
Thanks. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to mention something that our Census Bureau does, which is like one of our main statistics agencies in America, which is they run a project called the Opportunity Project. And the idea is that they put forward a problem statement and say, private sector, here's a problem that we're trying to solve. Can you use public sector data to solve it? And it's like a kind of hackathon event, and the people who startups or other kinds of tech companies can come in. And one of the benefits for the government is it shows us the art of the possible for what we can do, and that's really helpful and inspiring. One of the benefits for the companies is they get to wear the badge of public service, and they also get access to some of the key statistical officials who are making this data available. Typically, if you have a problem, you're calling a help desk, but you can actually get access. So that's a venue, I think, that we've been able to generate a lot of really cool ideas that use public sector data and that show us what we can be doing.
Great, I love that. Different ways of getting people together. Sigrid, I imagine in Estonia there's quite good connections, are there, between the public and private sector already on these issues?
Yes, I would say so, and we're trying to create new services for them as well. For example, a consent management platform where it's an idea where you can, as a citizen, I know there's a lot of data in public databases about me, and when I want a data-driven service, I can then give my consent to the private sector for them to use it. So this is like looking forward, because otherwise my answer was pretty much similar to Justin's. And then the second thing about every official understanding data, I think most officials in Estonia understand that there is something called the X-Road that enables them to share data between agencies. But where we are struggling, and we have now started to educate data stewards, because data management within the agencies itself is still a problem, and we need more data stewards in the field, so they could go up to the public agencies and make sense of the data within the agencies themselves.
Great, thanks, Sigrid. Nadan, I'm going to come to you. You've probably witnessed a lot of this in your work with departments.
Yeah, so let me pick up on the skill side first. I think there is a evolution of things happening in terms of having the right skills and the right type of people to do data related stuff. On one hand, some organizations are in public sector trying to improve what I call the professionalization of data roles. There are some already, but trying to make it even more recognized as a civil servant role so that people can thrive in terms of their career. But then I think there is an issue, not just in public sector. Overall, there aren't enough data experts in the world for us to use in all the things that we want to do. So until we completely change our schooling and education systems to produce more data experts, we got no choice but to try and look for alternative. Rather than trying to build everything yourself, how can you combine your efforts? Now, public sector, again, has got a very unique opportunity to do this compared to private sector, because public sector organizations are not competitive, right? So, in this evolution of discussions, there's a group of people in public sector now who are talking about the idea of a co-op model, a cooperative, where you don't try and hire everyone for yourself. You combine the people and the capabilities you have to create something that is bigger than the sum of the individuals that you put together. Very early stages, but this is I think a very promising and a great way to accelerate the data-enabled services in public sector. Lastly, on the private sector versus public sector side, as Tom said, I don't think there's a competition. Partnership and collaboration is the best way forward, and it's recognized for all parties involved. But for anyone who doesn't think public sector can innovate, I want to remind people the modern day software industry that we're talking about, the internet, they all came out of public sector. So I don't think there's any restriction in public sector being able to lead in terms of innovative thinking.
Thanks, Nadan. Sue, we started with you. I'm going to come to you for the final word on this. I can't believe how quickly our time has gone, but your thoughts on public and private sector working together and skills across civil services.
Yeah, it's gone really quickly, hasn't it? It's been so interesting to listen to everybody else's experiences. I've been taking frantic notes, so you may find me following up with some of you. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with essentially what everybody has said. There is sometimes this kind of division made between public and private sector. I think the more, certainly from a UK perspective, you know, the lines have kind of blurred, haven't they, in terms of who's delivering those services on behalf of the public sector. And you know, absolutely there are lots of things to be learnt from the private sector, but equally, and I think this goes across to other colleagues who've been speaking for other governments, some of the standards that we're all trying to set, some of the frameworks, particularly around kind of the ethics and the legal frameworks, those are things that I think actually lots of private sector organisations are looking for a steer on what is the right thing to do, because this will ultimately help us as organisations in terms of that trust, because trust also needs to happen, doesn't it, when we're interacting with private sector organisations. And on the capability point, yeah, everything that everybody said. I think the other thing maybe that I'd add is probably from our perspective, we're looking at kind of ways that we can help to make that happen, because some of this kind of recruitment of certain posts or kind of adoption of particular standards may not happen by itself. So I've talked a little bit about the DSA, and that was established to kind of drive that adoption. So we're building things into what we call our controls process. So we'll be looking for particular standards. We're also actually working with our Treasury department in baking into some conditions into settlement letters and into kind of innovation pots that they're funding now as well. And more broadly than that, starting to look at things like the annual departmental plans and looking out for where are you talking about the basic 5 areas of reform that we've set out in the National Data Strategy. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's a positive note to end on in terms of looking like we're going to be taking all of this on board as we go forward in our different civil services. I would like to say a massive thank you, not just to the audience who sent in so many questions. I'm afraid we couldn't get through all of them, but I hope you found the discussion interesting and that we tried to wrap up as many of those in kind of more generic questions as possible. Thank you so much to our brilliant panel. It's so wonderful to get this global perspective. To Nadan, to Sue, to Justin, to Sigrid, to Tom, thank you so much for giving us your insights and all your time today. To anyone who didn't capture all of this or wants to share it with colleagues, there will be a link sent round of the full discussion. So you will be able to watch that again and share it with your colleagues as well. And there will also be a write-up on the Global Government Forum, and you'll get a link to that of all the key points that were raised. A big thank you to Deloitte once again for being the knowledge partner for today. And wherever you are, whatever country you are in, I hope you have a brilliant rest of the day, a good evening or a good afternoon, and hope to see you again. Maybe we need a part 2 because there were so many questions and so much that we could have carried on talking about. Thanks so much, everybody, and see you again soon, I hope. Thank you.